Hello everyone, this is Mini Ninjas, and on today's bootleg breakdown we're not looking at an SH Figuart figure at all, in fact. Curiously enough, when I was kind of searching through eBay, I came across an auction for what I think is a kind of a brand new bootleg in the form of a Figma Ryuko Matoi figure based off the Kill la Kill anime series line, and as far as I can tell, aside from the lack of box, this thing is looking surprisingly official for the most part. There's even an instruction guide down there. Now, in case you haven't noticed from my last few videos, I've been having no luck whatsoever with the recent batch of SH Figuarts figures. Namely, they're all absolute rubbish on the inside, completely fake joints and all. So I'm hoping by dealing with something that's actually based off a Figma figure, or the Figma line of series, we're going to get something that's going to be a little more tangible and not need too much work to fix up if I need to fix anything up. And at least from the cursory look here, everything looks good, so let's finish cutting off the tape off this thing. Because, well, without a box, this is the only way they hold all the bits together, and hopefully we'll have something workable here, and that looks nice. And actually works like it's supposed to. General aside here, from the editing standpoint of this video, I'm actually going to be speeding up the opening and unwrapping here, just because I kind of screwed the pooch in terms of the zoom here, so we're going to just kind of focus on the most important parts as I come across them. Namely, once you get rid of that little piece of film of plastic there, because all these bootlegs have to have that for some reason. First thing notice, the little shoulder bits of Seikentsu, I think it's the name of the suit in this case. The little shoulder bits were already off from transport, but thankfully they do plug right back in. Even on the real figure, to my understanding, they're a bit fiddly in order to work with, and they're supposed to be able to move, so it's understandable they're on peg system that kind of holds things in place. Speaking of joints and pegs, what I did notice is this figure is actually awfully stiff right out of the box in this case. That's good in this case because that means all the joints are nice and tight, but in some cases a little too tight, in fact. I was having a lot of issues at the time of this particular recording trying to move around the shoulders and elbows a bit in this case. They were actually a bit stuck on there, possibly from either assembly or some kind of adhesive, because I did notice there was a little bit of adhesive residue on this figure. But while they held in there really nice and tight, they were also really hard to move. In this case, the shoulder I was just messing with, which is her left shoulder, is also showing some fatigue and wear on it, or at least some kind of a grayish, whitish mess on there, so that's worth noting. Might not be the same on every other bootleg. And in terms of the waist joint there, it's supposed to be using on the little bendy bit a softer plastic, but unfortunately I guess a harder plastic means it's limiting movement a bit. In terms of the legs though, actually surprisingly good movement, I'd say. Everything's nice and stiff, possibly a bit too much so, but everything holds in place really well. And what I'm pointing there is it looks like there's supposed to be a joint that's supposed to be movable, or at least there's a separation of plastic, but as far as I can tell, it doesn't actually move. It seems to be just one solid piece. And generally speaking, the legs and everything seem to hold really well. The legs are really well done. It's the arms I've been having the most trouble with. I'm still, even in this part of the footage, just messing around. Here's that little kind of white film I'm talking about on the shoulder joint in particular. I'm trying to scratch it off. Some of it does come off, but it's also keeping the thing from moving too well. And there's supposed to be a wrist swivel, which I'm trying to mess with at the time of there. Not counting the Sensetsu fix. But the swivel, I was able to fix it off camera by the end of this footage, but it was definitely a bit of an issue trying to work it in there. Even then, I'm just trying to get it to move around, still having no real success there, but like I said, it is fixable, thankfully enough. A little bit of a Hikan Dream and a little careful twisting did loosen it up by the end. Overall, I'd say in terms of articulation, at least so far, and even a little bit after, we're still having a much better time with this figure than we were having with the SH Figuarts Goku and Vegeta, thankfully enough. There are little bits that pop off, like the little shoulder Sensetsu beats, but we're doing alright. Now, moving on to the actual accessories in this case, of course, we have one of the forms of the scissor blade in this case. The plastic is a little flimsy. It does the job, but I kind of would want something a little more solid. Moving on to the little bag of goodies there, we have, of course, a standard Figma base in there, along with the extending arms there, and all the extra hands, as well as this weird little plastic thing that Figma tends to do in order to help hold all the hands in place, which, if you're dumping the box, or in my case you don't have a box, it's actually quite useful. Now, in terms of the extending arm here, as we can clearly see, yeah, this is a recast. It's not been casted particularly well. You can see all the air bubbles in there. but thankfully enough, at least all the joints are nice and stiff in this case, if not a little bit too stiff. So in terms of the extending arm, it does do the job like it's supposed to. There's also the, one second getting out of the bag here, there's that little bit of plastic that kind of holds all the extra hands and such. I think on the original release that was actually like a solid, or at least a fuzzy color, not the clear one, which has been miscast. And just moving back to the extended arm, here's the one issue I did have with it, namely the little extending bit that is supposed to plug in the back of the figure. The peg itself is a little too wide to fit on there natively. I'm having a little bit of trouble struggling here, and I actually have to go off camera in order to sand down the peg that goes in the back in order to make it fit, because it's actually a little too wide. Mind you, that only took me like an extra minute or two, so at this point it actually fits on well, but just so you know, if you're getting this out of there, if it doesn't fit, it can be fixed. And it, like I said, in this case, since they're all being cast from the same bit, it might not fit right out the get-go. So just so you know. Now I'm removing the next few things from the bag, namely all the hands in this case. They're actually surprisingly well painted in this case, well casted for the most part. One of the other things they do include is an extra hand peg, which is a nice little addition. I wish the SH Figuarts had more replacement joints, but c'est la vie in that case. But moving on the hands, the knuckles and all the little details on the gloves seem to be fairly well painted. They are clearly hand painted, or at least they're not as refined and not factory done per se. But for the most part, the hands tend to be pretty good on there. There is one hand in the batch, which at least in my case, where there was definitely some flashing issue. I think it's one of the open fingered hands there, so there is a bit of a casting issue here or there. But generally speaking, they all seem to fit on the pegs when I was trying them fairly well, so at least you have a workable set of hands and you're not immediately risking the pegs like on some of the other figures I've tried up to this point. So that's a nice touch. And moving on to the face in this case, this figure, much like the real one, does come with two separate faces with center expressions, which, by the way, the expressions and the overall eye decals are actually, for the most part, really good on this figure. We have a bit of a yelling face and a flinching face. The yelling face does have a bit of paint issue, since they have on the back of the head there below the neck some kind of a painted black thing that's going on there. It's like that way on the real figure too, so it's just a matter of a little overpaint if anything. A little scratching will take it off there. I would suggest maybe a little soft sandpaper to fix that if you happen to have that on yours, but generally it's nothing that's too far away to fix. And then we have the grimacing face here, which maybe they might have had some more blush on the real one, but generally speaking, no complaints. It looks really good. And the last thing which I was mentioning there, yep, they have an officially, or at least what appears to be an officially printed out version of the instruction guide of how everything works in this case, also showcasing all the bits you're supposed to have on there, both in English and Japanese. So in case you're wondering, that does cover a lot of the details. And it's a nice little addition to have, even in terms of the bootleg. So I appreciate getting that as part of this kit there. So far, so good. We're generally happy with how this piece is working. Now, before I forget, there is one more accessory to talk about, of course, from the other bit of plastic, the fully unfolded scissor blade here. Much like the real one, it does come apart in the center there in order to pretty much get it to fit the hands on properly so you can kind of slide them in. My only chief complaint, other than the plastic being a bit flimsy, is I'm not sure if it's just me or my copy here, but the hands don't seem to have a perfectly tight grip on it, which is good, which means you can slide it in and out of the hands pretty easily, but it's a bit flimsy feeling. It feels like it's not a proper grip, so perhaps if there's anything that was slightly off here, it might be that the weapons are a bit too thin compared to the regular counterparts. I'm not sure if that's just from the way this particular pit has been casted or something, or maybe the hands were slightly warped to a slightly more open position. Either way, it is worth noting. It's something that probably can be fixed in a way, but it's not going to be like a huge deal breaker sort of thing. Just be careful how you're posing on this thing if you happen to decide to pick this up after watching this video or have one on the way. As we're looking at me messing around with the faceplates here, I just need to note it on here that I was actually having a lot of issue removing the first face in there, and as it turns out, part of the reason why is on the real figure there's supposed to be like a separate clear kind of outlet that slots in there that is meant for the face insertions and like a headbang insertion, but here it seems to be casted as one entire piece for the whole back of the head there. So what that probably means is that the allowances is slightly tighter than what would be on the real figure, so it was a much tighter fit in my case. I actually had to kind of take this thing under a heat gun in order to kind of really loosen it up so I could actually pull the bangs off and switch the faces. But after doing that, as you can see, everything fits in there like it's supposed to. It's a good snug fit, a little too snug, which seems to be kind of the reoccurring theme of this particular figure. And, well, just generally speaking, it looks pretty good. And in a second, as we're going to look at the next face, the yelling face, yep, the faces thankfully pop off a lot easier there, and the next one will swap on with relatively no hassle. Now we have it loosened. At the time of the video, also, I should mention, if it looks like the chin is a little cleaner, I did actually take a little bit of a knife work and roughly sand some of that stuff off there. I'll do a good polishing sand on that later, but generally speaking, other than the teeth being a little mispainted, now I look at it again, yeah, we're still doing pretty good. The head will pop right back on into the peg there with a good satisfying pop, which unfortunately, because this is an audio over, you're not going to hear it properly, but just generally speaking, the Figma pegs tend to be a lot easier to work with. So if you do need to do repairs or replacement bits, you're going to have a much easier time with this particular figure, is what I'm going to say. And with that, that's my review in a nutshell, which leaves really one last question. Could I safely recommend to pick up this particular figure? And at least at the current moment, the answer to that is yes. In terms of what I have here, or what I've seen for this particular example, we have a figure that's got a nice, clean, mostly matte finish on there. The joints are going to be a nice, tight fit for the most part, almost a little too tight at times, and actually too tight now that I think about it. And you have all the assorted accessories that you're supposed to have. You have a manual, which is a nice little added bonus. Generally speaking, you have everything that you expect to have out of the figure for 20 bucks. I'd say you're doing well here. The only downside, I'd say, is, like I said, some of those joints are a little too tight and need some wiggling there. And unfortunately, the torso articulation there, the little upper torso bit, that's a bit of a lost cause, I'm afraid, because the little chest band bits there are made out of a harder plastic than they're supposed to be. So it's not as flexible as you'd hope, unfortunately. But as you're willing to overlook that little bit, concerning the much cheaper price tag, you're doing all right here. I can safely say, yeah, go pick this up if you haven't been able to find it, especially for the same price point. And on that note, that's all I need to say about this one. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you're looking for more updates on what I'm doing in the near future and other little tidbits and fixes, of course, look at me on @ManyNinjas on Twitter, of course. And I think that's all I need to do for plugging. Thanks again for watching. Catch y'all later.